All right. Let's get started. I think we are all set here. So thank you everyone for attending this webinar on FuelEU Maritime, the countdown for optimizing bunkering. And thanks to BS Group for arranging this webinar. This webinar is sponsored by NAVTOR and StormGeo. With us today we have Vincent from Eramet. We have Julie from StormGeo. We have Joy from Mærsk Mc-Kinney Center for Zero Carbon Shipping. We have Alexander, Compliance Manager from Bernhard Schulte, Shipmanagement, and myself, Jacob, from Performance Director of NAVTOR. I would like to just give a quick intro round for knowing everyone on the call here. So let's start out with Vincent, and maybe just give a little bit of background of yourself, what you're doing, and your company. Thanks.
Thank you, Jacob. So hello everyone. So yeah, I'm Vincent Martre. I'm working since 2 years at Eramet Group. It's a French mining company specialized, let's say, in manganese and nickel and some other metals. And to give you an idea of our volume, we are transporting around more than 12 million tons per year in bulk vessel or in containers. And in Eramet, I'm the freight market analyst, so in charge of the market analysis for bulk vessel and containers, and also in charge of the decarbonization for the logistics. So thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you very much. Moving on to Joe. So we're taking them in the order and appear here.
Great. Thanks, Jacob. And thank you to BS Group for having me here today. My name is Joe Bettles. I'm from the Mærsk Mc-Kinney Møller Center for Zero Carbon Shipping. I am a climate policy and analysis manager, and I've been working on the FuelEU for the last year and a half, leading a newsletter series called Countdown to FuelEU, and doing various sorts of analysis on our favorite piece of regulation from the Commission in the last few years, and looking forward to having the conversation. Thanks.
Thanks, Joe. Moving on to Julie.
Yes. Pleasure to be here. Thank you. I'm Julie from StormGeo. I'm the global head of bunker sales, so responsible for the digitalization of bunkering inside of StormGeo. I come with a little over 18 years of experience from the shipping industry, where I've been a tank operator and a bunker buyer previously.
All right, excellent. Let's then move on to Alexander.
Hi everyone. Thank you for having me here and participating into this excellent panel. I'm Alexander Senteris, compliance manager for emission regulations and trading in Bernhard Schulte Shipmanagement. Bernhard Schulte Shipmanagement is a big firm on ship management, operating and managing several segments and vessels basically active on dry bulk, cruise, LNG carriers, tankers in every segment. So basically we have a broad experience on the environmental regulations. And my main task is on energy policy and environmental policy, not the regulation that came into our way with Fit for 55 package.
Okay, excellent. And I also have a little bit of intro about myself, and I also have just a couple of slides just to introduce everyone to the subject. So I'll just share a very short set of presentation that I'll walk you through. So I'm representing NAVTOR. I'm the performance director. In short, NAVTOR is a fairly young technology company focused on green impact, established in 2011. We are serving around 18,000 vessels today, represented in 11 offices globally, and serving customers in plus 70 countries. Yeah, and our role is to, of course, provide technology to the shipping industry, mainly within primarily in e-navigation, but also within performance, digital logbooks, and various other areas. I have a little bit of on you could say what the different regulations driving the decarbonization in shipping. So both EU and IMO have enforced different way of collecting data, enforcing various schemes upon us. EU MRV was the first, IMO followed by IMO DCS, CII, ETS came in to force start of this year, and now FuelEU Maritime is upon us. And this, you could say, covers different aspects. They measure different ways, and we collect different data sets to both document and see how we move forward in terms of decarbonizing our industry. And we're doing it in different ways. IMO defined different in their greenhouse gas strategy, have defined different pathways and measuring how the industry is following these trajectories and looking at different, say, scenarios of these. Meanwhile, EU have now initially enforced the ETS and now FuelEU Maritime, where we'll see, say, a cost impact, of course, of these new fuels coming into play, and we will likely see that the FuelEU Maritime cost will at some point also overtake or increase above the cost level of ETS, and more to come, of course, in terms of regulatory changes. In terms of FuelEU Maritime, just to put everyone on the same page here, we have the greenhouse gas intensity, which is very different way of measuring it compared to how we would known it under IMO DCS or EMRV, where it was more grams of CO2. Now it's grams of CO2 per CO2 equivalent, and it's say slightly measured in a slightly different way. So we are measuring CO2 per grams of or per megajoule of energy instead of per metric ton of fuel. And here we are looking at increasing the usage of low carbon fuels. So initially, the first year will be a phase-in of 2%, and then we will see a reduction going forward. And the compliance options we're looking at, and partly also will be discussing today, of course, is of course the alternative is always seen against paying a penalty, which is currently set at 2,400 euro per metric ton of very low sulfur fuel equivalent. And then there are different alternatives. So there are some mechanisms defined with pooling, borrowing, and banking. We have various low carbon fuel adoptions, which is of course some of the other obvious solutions. We have shore power, which will also partly be enforced for container and passenger ships. And then we have a wind-assisted propulsion, which is having one of the few technologies have specific being defined within, say, the FuelEU Maritime greenhouse gas intensity as direct impact to that. And of course, there are more to come. So we know that there are a lot of regulatory initiatives to reduce emissions going forward, both on IMO level, but also in individual on different regional levels to be expected. So both in terms of ECAS, potentially also in terms of similar to FuelEU Maritime. So yeah, so this is some of the things we will discuss today. So this was just a brief introduction to the topic. And we can now move on to the poll. So I'll just start the poll, the first poll, which will address, you could say, how familiar are you with the FuelEU Maritime? And we will ask you as audience to this webinar to vote in your belief in terms of where you see the familiarity in the industry. So maybe Vincent, could you maybe comment on how you see it, like from your perspective, how familiar do you see you are in your business?
Yeah. So thanks for the question. I think I will say I'm somewhat familiar. I think we are on the easier side of the regulation as a shipper. At Eramet, what we decided is to let the ship owners deal with it, and they just pass us the cost. We did the same for the ETS. They are in charge of buying all the allowance, all the fuel that they want, and they put it on the freight for us. So for us, it has not been an impact. So we know the regulation. We have been prepared for it. We made study to know what will be the potential additional costs that we will have to face. But we did not deep dive in it, like a story of pooling or the mechanism. That I think the ship owners are really looking into it because it's really important for them and well more difficult to understand, I would say, from what I have seen. It's in comparison with the ETS, FuelEU is for me well more difficult to understand and apply.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Alexander, do you have any comment? You've been working within BSM, a large ship management group, so you have maybe also dealt with a lot of different people within your group. Can you comment on how do you see the familiar? You could say, how familiar do you see people are with the whole regime here, and how to be prepared for this? Can you comment on anything from your end?
Yeah, of course. As Vincent said as well, I mean, FuelEU regulation is a much more complicated scheme than ETS. ETS, you can easily pass the cost. There is a quite standard way of dealing with that. You know what you need to do. You know what you need to purchase. You can estimate the price at any given time. FuelEU is a much more complex regulation because you have a lot of small details affecting either the charterer or the owner and the historic commercial trade of the vessel and potential future trades. I would say that it requires a lot more collaboration and open, transparent way of doing business, which is something that is a challenge. I feel that we are still on an early stage. I mean, now everybody starts understanding how the regulation works, but all the details related to the contractual agreements, all the details related to compliance years and how it will affect aligning the commercial timeframes like charter party periods with the reporting year remains a challenge. And settling also all compliance deficits or surplus is, I would say, an area that has many interpretations and many kind of small details and lines that needs to be balanced throughout. I think we will elaborate throughout the panel on that, but I would certainly highlight these aspects. So how the settlement is done, how is the periodic settlement done, and how the strategy and the responsibility commercially and regulatory is assigned to different stakeholders within the shipping industry.
All right, thank you very much. So you see a lot, you could say, also on the, you could say, the commercial uncertainties and in terms of how it binds up to, you could say, the commercial activities for the vessels and how to cope with that. All right. Joe, do you have any comments on the same topic? I mean, from your perspective?
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, I think this is a big motivation for why the center has gotten involved in FuelEU to begin with. As we all know, uncertainty kills or prevents any sort of investment or strategic thinking. If you can't explain in a simple way to your CFO or your board of directors why you should invest in something, then they're not going to give you the green light. So we've been focused in the last year on addressing this uncertainty, and we've done this in various ways of doing through newsletters, and we are not alone. There's many other, including private companies, doing a lot of great work to try and address the complexity, because this is, as been mentioned several times, it's just a more difficult topic to understand, and there's so many details that really make the difference. But the reason we want to address that uncertainty is really the next stage, which is to get companies to start thinking strategically. So, as was mentioned, Vincent, in the beginning of thank God we don't have to deal with this complexity. Well, and I completely respect that. There's definitely days when I don't want to deal with the complexity of FuelEU. But we hope to help companies get past that complexity. And I think that's also part of the reason for this webinar, to start thinking strategically. Okay, how can we actually potentially even earn revenue, but at the very least reduce our compliance costs? And there's many strategies which we will cover here, of course, that has to do with bunkering. And we're really focused on, maybe it's a small share of the industry, but an important share that's focused on how can we go all the way green. So ships that there are companies that really are committed to meeting net zero goals. FuelEU offers an opportunity to earn revenue by selling surplus units, and that we haven't seen before. So it's a really exciting opportunity, but of course, in order to get to that stage, you need to really deeply understand and be able to communicate to your internal stakeholders how this regulation works.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. I can see the votes is that 40% says they are very familiar. 30% says they're very familiar. 36% somewhat familiar. So I would say it's leaning towards that people say that they are, that you say, more inclined to be, you could say, accustomed to the regulation in general. But I think it may be you still see the early days of seeing how it's impacting you, of course. But at least there is you could say familiarity with the whole, you could say, regulation as such. Julie, do you have any comments? I mean, yeah.
I of course have, but I mean, in StormGeo we are very familiar. I would say we are one of the few who launched the FuelEU Maritime solution a few months back. So it's fully functional, it's fully ready. We have onboarded clients already, but what we do see out there is that there is lots of confusions and there is lots of uncertainty. Can we use our Excel sheets as we have done until now? Can we expand the Excel sheets which we have, and then try to do it ourselves? But there's a lot of, I mean, with the FuelEU Maritime coming into force 25, there's lots of other parameters which is maybe not taken into consideration, which is the verification of the data, being ready for audits and so on. And yeah, so that's what we try to do, at least, is to put clarity out there, and as Joe says, put them in a strategic good position going forward, because this is only the beginning. It would be naive to think that it stops here. I think it's only developing along the way, and it would also surprise me if this is not coming to the remaining of the world, and not only EU.
So I briefly covered a little bit what are the different options. So what do you consider like being the obvious options for shipping companies to comply? Because there is you could say the pooling, the borrowing and banking. So of course the gap is not that big initially. Of course that will grow, but of course there is you can of course also borrow. So you could say lean a little bit into the future. There's the banking. Certain vessel types that are LPG on dual-fuel, they may have had a little bit of surplus initially, so they can consider if they want to sell off, if it's within something they can use within a year, then they can bank it, or they can go into the pooling where they can, you say, acquire at a potentially like or obviously slightly lower than paying, say, the penalty cost. So or you say what you're presenting here, Julie, is of course sourcing the alternative fuel, all the different, you could say, options you have for lower carbon. What do you see? What is the option, you could say, obvious choice that you see that you could say companies would be inclined to be doing from 1st of January?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for the short term, I think it's definitely make a strategic move on your bunker procurement. Go into the alternative fuels because that will at least help you here and now. Then the question about the pooling without being a specialist on that area, but I do foresee an issue on this because when you pool the vessels, as I understand it at least, when you pool the vessels, then you also lock them in. You can't just move them around in different pools. Also
That's
meaning
right.
that when if you have, then are going to, then you also lock your vessel in that pool, and you can't just TC it out because that TC out will then remain in this pooling. So I do see that there will be lots of challenges in the pooling side without being a specialist again and without having deeply gone through the regulation on this part. So from my recommendations would be get a complete overview of your fleet here and now, and get an overview so that you are ready to expand your fleet also with voyage charters and with time charter vessels, and then deep dive into the alternative fuels out there. And the easy part would of course be I normally call it the BX, so the B24, B30, because that's just in order to get some kind of approvals from the manufacturing to burn this fuel without doing too many constructions on the vessels and the tanks.
Yeah, there's a lot of practical aspects, of course, in this, and in terms of what you can say practically burn, handle on board, and can you actually source it from, you say, the ports where you are calling? Like practically, are you actually passing through ports where it's available? So of course there's a lot of practicalities around it, but of course you can pool within your own fleet, and maybe Alexander have some perspective on that. I mean, you have a large operation, so you have some you could say freedom in terms of you can also do things more internally and maybe at a larger scale than others maybe able to do.
Yeah, as you said, we have a large fleet, a lot of vessels that can generate surplus, a lot more vessels that create a deficit as they operate now. But the thing is, again, we have a lot of moving parts again. And as the contractual agreements and all the charter parties are not fixed, all these exercises based on assumptions, I would say. So in our fleet, and what we do is that we are trying to provide and strategize along with the owners. But as we see now, we have a big potential surplus generated by LNG vessels, which contractually and commercially it is highly debatable who will be the owner of the surplus and who will monetize the surplus, which remains to be seen. Everyone has its own views. I have my own views, but I don't want to get into detail as the very few commercial agreements have been reached in that regard. But what is important is, and I think this was also the intention of the pooling mechanism and the intention of the regulation, is to try to find a global optimization. Global, I mean the full fleet. You don't try to reduce the emission on a vessel specifically. So you are, and each owner is enabled to provide, to create a strategy that is much broader than the limited scope of one vessel. So what we see is that there is a lot of discussion on biofuel, of course, not only for compliance of the vessel specifically, but also into creating some pool based on biofuel. So an owner that has several vessels that will use one as the main biofuel, let's say, surplus generation, and then it will spread the surplus into their own fleet or monetize it through pooling, which has its own details that needs to be carefully accounted. That's the first option. What I see and what we see a lot is discussion on wind-assisted propulsion. This aspect is taking more and more speed, especially with the quite, I would say generous, but quite nice and already communicated benefit of running on WASP. The issue here is that the capital investment is significant. So financing this kind of project is one aspect that needs careful consideration. This is something that we're taking with our clients, but also the commercial utilization of the vessel will impact significantly the returns of such investment. So if you want to have something that requires more commitment, like WASP, you need to have some certainty on your trade routes and some certainty on the potential returns you have. This is why biofuel is considered like the easiest option out. We'll see what the future holds, but certainly there is a lot strategies, and even access to biofuel is not the same for all owners. It's not the same for all vessels. So this needs to be considered. I would say that there are so many different options and so many variances of each solution, which is quite important to basically model it and consider it in detail, because it can make a huge difference.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Vincent. Joe, do you have any comments on the regulation side and pooling and all, you could say, the regulatory part of, you could say, the compliance options that we are sitting with and need to navigate here?
Yeah, just one thing. First, I agree, and all that has been said aligns with our thinking. One thing I thought would be good to reference here is what the penalty price is, because it was set really high in this regulation. So for you, as you showed, Jacob, it's about 2,400 per ton of VLSFO equivalents. It's kind of a strange unit, but what that amounts to for if you're running on heavy fuel oil is between $700-800. So it's quite high, and that's per ton of deficit. When you convert that into the additional cost per ton of heavy fuel oil, it's about $60 to $70 per ton. So, for thinking like a $600 per ton heavy fuel oil, it's not a significant amount. It's less than the ETS. But if you then compare it to the compliance strategy of using biodiesel, as was mentioned, and if you take say a $1,100, $1,200 biodiesel, and you're able to get just the right percentage to be in compliance, then you're down to between $20 and $25 per ton additional. So that's about a third of the cost of the penalty. So that's just to illustrate that even though the scale, it's just 2% in these early years, that the scale isn't as big as it will be in later years, there's still significant savings to be had. And so that's why it's important for my colleagues like Vincent to push on their ship owners to make sure they're not just passing on the penalty costs and try and lower that compliance costs. And then I think we really try and emphasize that companies need to look at a long-term view, because the costs are low. pay. Even the penalty, $60 extra per ton of heavy fuel oil. The market varies more than that in a given year, so that's doable. Yeah, but it's going to triple by 2030 to 6%, and continue to go very steeply up from there, 14.5% in 2035. And of course, we're looking at IMO coming out with their own fuel standard, which has a reduction pathway that's even more dramatic. So I think that companies should near term definitely look for other options than the penalty, and long term get serious about how is my fleet or the owner's fleet that I work with going to have a viable pathway where I'm not just stuck with these massive penalties. And for that, of course, there's a lot of uncertainty as to which pathway it actually looks like from the Q&A. Maybe that's where we're headed next. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, you know a little bit about you could say the development in the policy area. So I guess the penalty is also something that would be adjusted if they see that there's too little adoption. So of course we cannot anticipate that it will stay like that. I guess there will be an evaluation at some point. I don't recall the exact evaluation date, but I guess it's also you could say this is something moving, and at the same time IMO is, as you say, they're also coming in with, say, new regulations and reduction trajectories.
Yeah, so I guess setting aside IMO for a moment, there is no clause within the regulation that says that it will be adjusted up. But of course, it could be amended in the future to be adjusted up. But I think in general, it's good to think about these regulations as levers that can be ratcheted up. And even if the penalty, which, I mean, it actually is set very high so that you could maybe even leave it through the transition. I mean, it is set almost double the abatement cost of even e-fuels. It's very high. So, but other things like, for example, and this is if the IMO weren't to replace it, but something like there is a mandate, right? It's a soft mandate right now, the RFNBO subquota. But that's something that, you know, it's part of the regulation and it could get more teeth in future years. So something closer to what we see in aviation, where by certain dates they have to use SAF and then later on they have to use ESAF. We could start to see something like that, and all the more reason to start to think long term.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Vincent, do you want to comment on, you could say, what are the, say, compliance options that you're considering? And are you thinking like Alexander and Joe was mentioning, I think it was also Julie mentioning, thinking a little bit more strategic on, you say, going about this in terms of sourcing fuel, these future fuels or alike?
For now, it's not on our plate and in our agenda to look at this. At least for the moment, we are starting to consider several options, but it's not related to the FuelEU Maritime, especially. It's more to decarbonize our logistics on a global view. But to be honest, for me, for this FuelEU Maritime and this new fuel, I'm a little bit concerned by the fuel availability that we will face, because for the moment it's easy to speak about methanol, LNG, ammonia, but in terms of supply, you almost have anything. So what you will do for the next year, you want to use biofuel. Okay, that's nice, but availability is also limited. Joe spoke about the aviation industry, and I think that aviation industry will take a very big part of the biofuel when they will need it, because it's only one of their decarbonization possibility. So I think it will be not very easy. And in addition, you have a lot of vessels that are not fitted for the moment with all of these new fuel, as mentioned by Alexander. So I think that one of the biggest problems of this, for me, in terms of this regulation, is that we'll have to use the green fuels, but the shipping industry is not responsible of all the value chain of this green fuel. We need to use something that we don't have the control of it. And in addition, we speak about Europe, but a lot of this production of this new fuel is concentrated in, let's say, Asia and Middle East. And as we were saying that maybe new regulation could apply, when they will apply on this area, I think they will keep the supply and stop sending it to us because they will need it. And at this moment, it will be maybe even more difficult for us to concentrate to have it. And I think that the biggest player need to work a lot on this to secure this availability. I think it's a risk for them, but I think it's also an opportunity. Because for the ship owner, if you are able to, I don't know, offer rate with biofuel, LNG, methanol, I think on the future, it could give you some advantage on the market because you're able to offer a green solution. But such things of security are for me only for the big player. If you look to the news, the guys that are securing new fuel availability, working a lot on this, are only the big one you see as like the greenhouse that can produce biofuel, that have the means, the knowledge to produce it. You have the big like traders, or mining group like Trafigura. I think they buy some biodiesel company recently. They are also invested in ammonia, which they have some project. I think that to do this at the third beginning, it will only be the big player that will be able to do it because it's requiring very
thinking
big amount of money.
strategically about it, like
Yeah.
managing in a more strategic way. I mean, I tend to agree that if we look at, say, how ETS cost was handled, I mean, the bigger companies, they are more strategic in the way that they do
Yeah.
it. They're buying futures, they're hedging, while you see like the small, medium sized are looking more like, you could say, covering up their cost, closing the books and moving on. So I tend to agree with you, but we will probably see that there is a differentiation in maybe cost levels, and that's maybe a nice segue onto the cost element. So of course the uptake, as you mentioned, the biofuel uptake in the market, is, you say, the demand will increase. What does that impact, you say, our fuel pricing? And we also just ran a poll on, say, what do we see as do we see or expect an increase in pricing on these low carbon fuels in the next coming years, 2025, 2026. So I guess the answers are slightly on you could say on that day. It's, you could say, in around the middle, but it's slightly on the expectation to increase. Julie, you're our expert on the bunkering side and on bunker sourcing and pricing. So what's your comment on that? What is your, you could say, what do you see in the crystal ball for the next 2 years ahead for all these new, say, low carbon options that we're looking at?
If I knew that, Jacob, I would not be sitting here. I would be sitting on board with a cocktail. But no, I mean, I think it's quite obvious that. Now I should be taking my words carefully into consideration here. But I think it will rise. I mean, as Vincent also saying, the product is not available, or if it is available, then it's only for specific regions. And I think that's here where the industry is maybe, that's my own opinion, shooting ourselves in the foot, because everybody wants to invent the wheel. Someone wants to go methanol, someone wants to go ammonia, someone wants to have B30, B100, B24. That's resulting in the suppliers. What should they produce, or what should they source? And I have been on the refinery side as well. What is the refineries going to focus on in the production? So I think actually the shipping industry is hindering themselves in doing this green transition, and that is also resulting in the price, because too many players need too many different grades, and you will end up in areas where you can't source the grade which you have decided on, because that area has taken a stand because they need to do that one way or another. So I actually think the industry would stand or have a better position if they started to join force. What is the first step we take? And I think and see that everybody, no, not everybody, the big players out there, they are shooting left, right, and center with what they think will be the future fuels. The middle players are somewhere in between, waiting a bit, taking a bit of action, and then there is the smaller players who doesn't have the capital to go out and modify your vessels or their vessels, who need to wait for the industry to take a position before they can afford to take a position. So coming to the price element, the prices will rise, but that is due to this uncertainty in the market. And I also think there is a tendency to blame it all on the suppliers. Why are you not stocking up with the products? But the reality is that because the ship owners is taking too many directions, then the supplier doesn't know which product to stock up with. Because then there is also the quality of the biofuels, for instance. They can't just blend something and then let it be in the tanks for 2, 3, 4 months, because then it's not stable anymore. The product will not be stable anymore. So then the supplier can throw out this whole batch of fuel or reblend it one more time, which also comes with a cost. So at the moment, majority of the suppliers out there, they only blend the biofuel upon request. So once they have a stem in place, then they start blending it. So the prices will rise, that's for sure, and the sourcing is an issue.
Yeah, I mean, we just ran a poll, and it's majority votes, say 61% votes that it's, you say that they see the biggest challenge to be the fuel availability, and of course probably that would also most likely drive up the cost. Alexander, how do you go about this? I mean, what do you see as the biggest challenges for you in you say in securing, you say, futures, or buying, you say, making long-term agreements, or securing that there are people getting the demand, like, and start producing these, you say, new fuels? Because I guess it's also the chicken and the egg here, is that Julie touched maybe a little bit up on it, is that of course there need to be demand in the market, and if we're waiting to the last moment, then we will fall short. I mean, there will be too little maybe. Can you say something about how you go about it, and are you doing more strategic, like long-term agreements to get these new fuel types delivered?
Yeah, thank you for the question. What I would like to highlight here is that if you want to make a long strategy with a long time frame, you need to have certainty. You cannot do it on speculation. You need to have something solid on your end. So how we deal with that at this point is that we have several partners and we are securing some volume that we can utilize and distribute through our clients. But uncertainty is the main issue on setting a strategy. And I don't mean necessarily uncertainty on the availability of fuel, on the pricing, which is still there. But I also try to reference uncertainty on commercial agreements, uncertainty on trade. So how you are going to monetize a strategy if you don't know where your vessel will be in 2 months' time. This is an issue that we are all to face. Another issue that is currently something that we should consider. And again, not all owners and not all vessels have the same capabilities either to uptake fuels technically or commercially. So the cost to compliance is not the same for everyone. It differs significantly from owner to owner, from vessel to vessel, from trade to trade. What is the catch here is that even in Europe, the availability is not everywhere. So we have major hubs. Many of them, they have subsidies on these products for long. So they have created kind of a market, which is the main source of these alternative fuels. What I would see as a challenge is that the price of the fuel is not directly linked with the environmental benefit. And what I'm trying to say is not is the environmental benefit in terms of emission, but in terms of financial benefit under FuelEU. So currently we have all these blends, as Julie mentioned, BX, B25, B30, B whatever, but not every biofuel is the same. So you need to be very, very careful on, first of all, the certification of the bio component, but also on the actual greenhouse gas intensity, because you pay the same price and you can end up with a greenhouse gas intensity of 8, 15, 20, 30, 40, anywhere in between. So any of this number will make a huge difference on how you monetize the surplus you generate, or how much, let's say, fossil fuel you can basically balance through that biofuel. And you only know that when you have the delivery note and you have the R&D certification.
Thank you very much, Alexander. I mean, you're touching upon something interesting, and I think one important part here is the certification part, in terms of what are the, you could say, certification required in order, you could say, that you need to have in place in order to benefit, you could say, from buying these, say, low carbon fuels or low greenhouse gas intensity fuels, because of course otherwise, you could say, if you cannot you could say document the well to wake greenhouse gas intensity, then you will not benefit from it, and then you will lose out from the high price you have paid. Julie, do you want to comment on that? I think you're well equipped to answer on this part.
Yeah, I can. Yes, the certification is being the biggest challenge for now. It is also going to be something which everybody needs to put focus on, because you can't claim your bio as bio if you don't have the certificates. And if you don't have the right certificates, well, then you will have an issue with your FuelEU mandate. It then comes down to also being you need to go, the bunker buyers need to go into the market in a different way, because now it's not only as Alexander says, there's a different bio grades, and each bio grade is different. And what FuelEU is focusing on is the DHD percentage of the bio. So the bunker buyers need to go into the market in a new way now, not only asking for ISO specifications, but to ensure that they put a DHD percentage on or max DHD percentage on the requirements. And then it is the big question here is, because what we hear and see out there is that lots of owners are waiting 4, 5, 6 weeks after the supply to receive these certificates from their biofuels or alternative fuels in general. And that's where you need some platforms to assist you, or at least some suppliers to assist you on this part. You need to ensure that the certificates is coming with the barge. You should think that the supplier, or coming from the refinery side, the certificates are following the product. So you have to ensure that when the barge go alongside, then you have the certificates or receive the certificates. So there's lots of admin stuff coming into force here as well. But for sure, the certificates is crucial here, both on the DHD certification, but also the origin of the product.
Do you have any comment on kind of what you should watch out, like what is it that you should set to your bunker supplier? I mean, what should we all ask for if you're buying bunkers? Do you have any comment on that part?
Yeah, I so this is an area that unfortunately has a lot of remaining uncertainty. And I think Julie's done a good job of outlining all that you need to think about. And I guess it just means a much closer relationship and more transparency, more exchanging of information and longer term planning, which I'll be interested to see if that ranks as higher on the poll. But I want to also make a note, loop back to something that Julie pointed out in the beginning, and you know, we're thinking in here at the center and at a higher level sometimes in the industry, but I think it's an important point, which is there are two buckets of uncertainty. There's the uncertainty that we have power over, and that very much includes certification. I mean, we need this to be absolutely rock solid, simple, clear guidance. Everybody knows the rules of the road. And the European Commission, I know, is working very hard, along with ESSF and many, maybe even people on this call, are working very hard to make that guidance happen. It's not as soon as we would like, but that is part of trying to do something big and bold and ambitious. And then there's uncertainty that we don't have control over, and that in some ways we need to kind of make friends with or get used to, which is this technological uncertainty that Julie was pointing to. Of course, in an ideal world, we would all know the solution to decarbonize shipping, and then we would all just put lots of money into that solution and scale it up. But that is not where shipping is on its decarbonization pathway. It is closer to where automotive was, say, 30 years ago, when I, as a kid, went to a car show and there was a car running on ethanol, and then there was a car running on hydrogen, and then there was these funky battery cars. Oh, but those will never work. And then here we are, right, with a lot of experimentation, a lot of actually, you know, it's funny, we talk about the big players being benefits from the getting benefits, and I completely agree that in many ways, bigger players are able to think more strategically. They're also the ones that are placing big bets that could not pay off. And in some ways, what we need to do in this moment is to find ways to incentivize experimentation in these different fuel types, so that as quickly as possible, we can start to at least narrow the field. So, okay, that didn't work. Well, you know, ELPG, okay, that doesn't seem to work. And then we can get to a place where there's more technological uncertainty. But I think forcing certainty when there isn't actual technological certainty gets you to where, you know, a Japanese automaker decides, oh, batteries, let's not invest in that. Or American automakers, I'll include my people in this decision making. So tackle the uncertainty where we can and make friends with it where we can't.
All right. Thank you very much for that perspective. I mean, the compliance is of course also you say somewhat technological limited or driven. So wind propulsion is one thing, but LNG, LPG, and you say other means of, you say, vessels designed for a specific fuel, or you could say capable of burning specific fuel, or with a high level of efficiencies, is you could say could also be considered to deploy these vessels more into, you could say, EU trades to and from or between EEA ports. And I'm curious to know, I mean, Vincent, do you see any movements on this where you see, like, in terms of securing vessels for specific trades? Is that something where you're seeing that, say, focusing more on the more efficient? So of course, a more modern vessel or eco vessel would of course also incur less potential penalties, or it could be vessels with say a dual fuel or alternative fuel capability. Do you see any of this in your parts or in your business?
To be honest, for the moment, no, but I think it will come in the future. I think that's the best vessel, the most efficient, the new design, maybe new building. You will have incentive to send them where the customer needs it. So for the moment, it will be Europe. If you can win and have a potential advantage to here, you need to send it. It's I think for the ship owner, especially the largest one, that can send their fleet where they want. I think they will decide to do this. Send their best vessel to at least the Atlantic, because I think some other countries in the Iraq would decided to do this. And I think this is something that will come. And I think that, as you mentioning, some shipper will also move to securize some good vessel. We already see it. For example, on the small segment, we see that some, let's say, some biggest miner or metallurgists are signing some long-term contract to build very modern vessel to reduce the logistic emission. This is something which is clearly happening now, and I think it will increase more and more in the future, because, as I think Joe said it's a big investment to invest on this, and I think that the owners could be reluctant to do it without any help from the shippers. And if, for example, you fix a big seaway for 10 years on a vessel, you could have the incentive to build one. To say, okay, I will invest, okay, I will maybe retrofit it. I think we have the example of Tech Resources. It's on the US, but it's the same spirit. They made a deal with Oldendorf to use rotor cells. So I think that without any long-term event, you cannot do anything. And I think that, as you mentioned, yes, this type of behavior to have best vessel calling Europe will happening on the future. And you will also have the, let's say, opposite effect, sort of opposite effect. You will have shipowners reluctant to go to Europe because they don't want to comply with all this regulation, especially for the smaller ones. They don't have any means or resources to look at this, to look at all the different regulations. I would say, okay, no, I will not call Europe, or maybe 1 time a year, 2 times a year. It's too difficult. I prefer to send my vessel other way. And we already heard some shipowners saying this.
Do you see it more as you can say, so it's not only they say the cost aspect, but it's just as much all the complexity, regulatory scheme and reporting? Do you see that is the burden that they have to carry?
To complicate for them. And in addition, one point I think is also important is this regulation is only concerning vessel above 5,000 GT. So let's say the biggest one, but if you look to the smallest one, they are for most of the time very small company with like 2, 3, 4, 5 vessels with very little resources. If they are concerned one day by this, I think it will be very, very difficult for them to tackle all of these resources. This type of big regulation is very difficult for the small company, I think. And this
so it's more that it becomes a bigger burden for the smaller players, you could say.
Because they don't have bargaining power. I don't know, when you are CMA CGM and you want to buy biofuel, you can invest not as you want, but you can put big money to have it. When you have 2 vessels on your fleet, how can you compete? I think will be one of the challenges for the future, this one.
Thank you, Vincent, for your input on this. Alexander, do you have any comment on this? I mean, of course, as a ship manager, you're not necessarily the operator or deciding upon this, but do you see any, you could say, of this happening, that the vessels or more efficient vessels maybe get deployed on specific, say, areas or trades, or specific, say, vessels with specific, say, dual fuel capability is preferred or put into trades? Are you seeing any of this happening within your fleet?
Of course, I feel that all this package of regulation, I wouldn't say FuelEU or ETS. I mean, all of this, they provide an incentive for owners or charterers to deploy more efficient vessels in Europe, and vessels that have capabilities of accepting alternative fuels that they can utilize. But I would like to repeat something that Vincent just said. So I feel that most of the owners and most of the charterers, they are not that much concerned about the cost as such, because we are in this early stage, is not a huge burden. They're concerned about the complexities. And in BSM, especially because we have global presence and a lot of clients from different places, Asia, US, Europe, we see that also some specific region, they face more difficulties in even following the guidelines, because all the documents that are required and all the bureaucratic aspects that needs to be fulfilled, they are based on EU regulation. And you cannot, force a Chinese or a Japanese or Singaporean owner into EU regulation, because the documentation that they have is different, the setups that they have is different, and we set the guidelines as Europe has its own company setup. So this is something that has been a struggle in the beginning, and this is also something that creates this tiered market. So you have companies that are more close to the mindset and the setup of Europe, that have an advantage basically trade in Europe, other than owners that they don't have this system in place to support the regulation. So it creates some sort of, I would say, a competitive advantage, not even on the vessel, on the location, which is something that we certainly need to focus on and resolve it. That's the thing. On the vessel side, of course, as Vincent said again, vessels with dual fuel capacity or potential for operating alternative fuels, for sure have a benefit, or will have a benefit. But at this point in time, nobody is guaranteed anything. So the optionality and the modern fleet is basically an investment made by the owner itself, without any other. It's again speculation. So it's an evaluation that an owner does, that believes that this optionality will pay up in the future. But again, there is huge uncertainty, and this is why you cannot see vessels being deployed on these alternative fuels in great extent. Optionality, always in uncertain times, it's something that is that you seek, because you have alternative pathways to follow. But optionality has a cost, has its costs, and this is why we see a lot of big owners opting for that. We will have the capital and the experience to deal with that, and also the connection to utilize it in the future. But we see that also smaller owners, they are left behind, so they cannot tap this potential.
Yeah, so of course, if you are in a size where you can say have the capability to do major investments and long-term projections into, say, then you get the surplus, and you can capitalize this. So it would not, you could say, it would bring you in a you could say a more cost efficient way of operating. But I think it's you could say very interesting that perspective in terms of that. Do we see that the policy in, you could say, like FuelEU is providing, say, the advances for the larger shipping companies and being more the obstacle for smaller ones? And is that in general, say, the development in kind of the regulatory landscape? Joe, do you have any perspective on that? Like, are we designing a scheme both from, say, in this case from EU, that is more favoring like the larger size or major players in the industry?
Yeah, I think to some degree that is true. Just if you think practically, who can afford to hire a whole department to deal with strategic compliance of a regulation? It's not going to be a ship owner that has 2 or 3 vessels. I will note that this is a concern, and if you read the impact assessment on the FuelEU, it was a big consideration for the Commission. And they, as maybe it was Vincent or Alexander mentioned that the way that they attempted to deal with this is the cutoff of 5,000 gross tons. And so I forget the percentage, but the companies that are below 5,000 gross tons are about like 95% small and medium-sized companies. We all know this about shipping. It has this very long tail of small companies. And so, you know, many of the shipping companies that are smaller, that are really small, that really would struggle, are going to be excluded. And I have not heard any indication that those will be included. I guess the only exception may be that offshore vessels are going to be included in the ETS, and perhaps that will also apply in the future, but there's no plans. I think, you know, if I can maybe add one positive note for smaller companies, which, you know, it's something that we think about a lot, and is one of the reasons why we put all of our analysis out publicly, so that all companies of all sizes have access to analysis. But if I think about a smaller company that's having to, or struggling with complying with the FuelEU and getting a hold of the complexity, one advantage for them is that because in the early years for FuelEU, because it is just 2%, that the cost impacts are not likely going to put any company out of business. It's just, as I mentioned before, it's about a 10% if you're paying the full. So it's not going to drive companies out of business. And for those companies that do wrap their head around it, do find strategies, do team up with other companies, or perhaps a platform or some way to reduce their compliance, that is going to put those companies in a much better position when the IMO regulations come into place. So I do think that this is a bit of a sandbox, and because it's the lower percentage, it's maybe a way that we can help our smaller shipping companies get up to speed for when real steep reduction curves come into place at a global level.
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting aspect, because you could say for the smaller companies, the regulatory landscape is developing and it's becoming more complex. So how do you could say navigate it? And from my perspective, of course, working a lot in digital, I think, of course, digital tools is one of the ways. So the question is like, how can we? I mean, this is also what I'm representing here. So of course also that the broader industry needs, you could say, both tools, information. I mean, dissemination of this information that you're sharing within the center. I think that's of course super important for the industry actually to be able to comply at all, because otherwise we see the same tendency that we may have seen for when we tried to adopt ballast water treatment, which was like taking forever. But now the regulatory landscape is moving much faster, and that also is, of course, pose a challenge to the industry. So Julie, maybe, I mean, you're also working in digital. Maybe you could say, give your perspective of what do you see, how do you see digital tools can aid in the planning and navigating, you could say, the various compliance option in you could say specifically relating to FuelEU?
Yeah, sure. I would say if it was me, I'm glad I'm on the digital side now, as Vincent also said, not being hands-on for this. And I'm nearly getting scared on the company's behalf when they say, oh yeah, we will manage everything in my Excel sheet, because Excel is the best tool ever, which has been launched, and it's functional and it's workable, and we all know how that works. But we also do know that we are only humans, and one mistake in the Excel sheet can ruin your full mandate, or you can tend to think that you are in line with your mandate for FuelEU until someone deep dive into the Excel sheet and find this one error which has made the calculation completely wrong, right? That's where I think the digitalization of FuelEU especially is needed. And that's not only because I sit on the digital side, but it is, I mean, who wants to be responsible for not fulfilling the mandate out there by the end of the year because of an error? Then I rather wanted to have a digital platform giving you the alarms and the suggestions and the calculations behind everything, which you can easily drag out to an Excel sheet if you are still missing your Excel sheets. But that would be definitely my view on it, both from the digital side, but also having worked on the other side of the desk.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your perspective. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think where I see it is also heading is that, I mean, before you could in some cases manage by, say, Excel sheet for some of the, especially if you didn't have like a large fleet. But I think the complexity is increasing now, and what you need to understand in order to, say, navigate the option is, of course, the green. You need to understand, say, on a fleet level what is my greenhouse gas intensity. Am I in a surplus or deficit position? And then what are the options? Because the longer we wait to figure out where we stand, the fewer options we actually have. You could say, I mean, to do the pooling, to buy biofuel and burn within the same, you could say, reporting year. So of course we limit our options the longer we don't know our position and where we would stand, say, when we get, you could say, the first, you could say, few months into 2025. So I think in that sense, and this is also what we are trying to do, is to provide tools that you can easily say that embeds all the rules and regulations, but bring it down to, you could say, simplified level where you can evaluate your different options. So I think it's definitely required that you move somewhat more digital from the past Excel into something that can actually handle this complexity for you. Because I think otherwise you will miss out on some big opportunities, cost saving wise as well.
I agree with you on that, Jacob, and I also again want to highlight, let's not be naive and think this is only going to happen for EU. I mean, it will happen for globally eventually. And are you then ready to sit with all your, let's say, 400 vessels in an Excel sheet and ensure that you fulfill the different mandates? Because we have also seen, I mean, taking bunkers into consideration, well, then there might be another region which puts some other regulations into place where there's some other mandates you need to fulfill and not aligned with the EU. If it was me, again, I wouldn't dare to sit in an Excel sheet to ensure that.
No, I completely agree. In terms of, you could say, in terms of the commercial aspects of this and the pooling, so BIMCO came out with some options to, say, defer the costs to the operator to some extent. I mean, Joe, do you have any comments on that development on you say the commercial side and the you say the opportunity, say, for the ISM manager to defer the cost to, you say, to the charter?
Yeah, I think maybe others can speak more intelligently onto the time charter clauses from BIMCO, but maybe just to frame the importance of this a bit more, the Commission has on purpose stayed out of the agreements between companies. So they added a lot of flexibility that says, you companies go off, figure this out between yourselves, and then come to us with a compliance balance that is satisfies the regulation. And so while that provides flexibility, it also creates a lot of need for additional legal and financial services to make these agreements happen. And so BIMCO has done a great job of coming out with some of these initial time charter clauses, which, as you said, help to share that risk so that the owner is not left holding the bag because their charter didn't comply. But also, of course, with the FuelEU, there are benefits of pooling. So what happens in terms of being, as a charter, having the right to take advantage of that benefit of pooling, and then to be able to be compensated for it if there's a time charter. And that's really the challenge, is the timing here, because shipping agreements between companies don't operate January to December like the regulation does. So, but I'll leave others to go into more details than I can.
Yeah, maybe Alexander can explain a little bit what he's doing from his end, since I guess you ultimately sit with the responsibility in this case.
Yeah, of course. I think that BIMCO clause and any kind of template clause, I would say, is a great guideline to start with. I'm totally with Joe on the problem, and I would generalize on the problem that the reporting is not in any case matching the contractual agreements. So all the commercial agreements are whatever periods which do not align. The issue here is that there are a lot details that need to be taken into account. I would just start mentioning a few, but there are several things that every owner needs to consider and every charterer needs to consider. So when you pass the obligation, or I wouldn't say the obligation, or the option to someone to pool your vessel under any of their pool, in the past, all companies will be very, very sensitive on which are the counterparts that they pool, because if you pass the right and you end up in a huge pool with vessels of companies that you don't want to be related to, such as sanctioned vessels or vessels that are related with trades that you don't want to be related, this is a reputation risk that you take, which was not undertaken. Also, the reporting years also affect any decision you made today. So if you are accepting, for example, to be compensated on the penalty level, then and you end up paying the penalty for this year, then on the next charter you cannot basically reconcile on the penalty because you have the 10% increase. So either you need to increase what you get compensated for, or you need to cover it up as an owner. So there are several other things. What is the compliance cost for each entity is also completely different on the charter's perspective. So there are a lot of discussions saying, why should I pay the penalty equivalent when you can basically comply with a much lower cost by pooling with some of the other of your vessels which procured by you. So there are several options here. Other aspects that are very, very sensitive is, which is linked again to the first point, is the obligation. So if I pass the right to pool and then the charter period is ended or terminated for any reason, then what happens to the right? What happens if I sell the vessel within the period, or I sell it the next year and the next owner does not accept to pool the vessel to my charterer's pool? There are several small details that are not addressed and will not be addressed on the broader scope that needs to be considered on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Do you already see like new type of contracts come into place for the vessels, or is it too early to say like how this will pave out in terms of you could say managing these rights, in terms of say charters managing the right to take a surplus or manage that, or you could say, be compensated in terms of paying the penalty rather than alternative cheap options? Or do you offer anything, you could say, in this aspect from BSM side?
Yeah, what we see is that a lot of this again is you cannot provide an answer that is global.
No.
So what we are trying to do is to work on a case by case with each client and see what are the pros and cons, what are the strong points and what are the weak points. So is it and the commercial arrangement of the vessel. So if we can set up a strategy that is more beneficial and we can help with the options that we can provide to our clients, which is like a service, kind of through BSM, which has a bigger kind of pool and access, we can try to utilize solutions to our owners, but it cannot be applied everywhere. So we see a lot of communication, we see a lot of different aspects and different approaches, from long-time charter to short TCs. A lot of clauses are being customized. And what is the most important thing is that all of these pieces need to end up into something that is basically a solid strategy and also does not contradict with each other. So this is something that is our main struggle at this point.
Okay.
And a lot of the volume and a lot of the main service, a lot of commercial setups are not set yet. So what we do is we provide options, what we can do and how we can assist, but how this will end up is a case by case for sure, and remains to be seen.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing your insights. I was curious to know a little bit from Julie's side, like if there's any way that shipping companies can hedge themselves against, say, the biofuel availability. I mean, is there any way that you see companies dealing with this in terms of, say, securing future delivery today?
Yeah, that's. I mean, definitely. I'm not really familiar with the hedging, but at least contract-wise, that's especially for the liner business who knows that I'm arriving Singapore in 1 month's time, and that I will do 10 times a year, so I need X amount of tons of B24. So the bigger companies, at least, are contracting themselves out of the sourcing of biofuels or LNG or methanol or ammonia, future fuels. So there is definitely an advantage to this. But the tramp business, at least the small tramp business, or the smaller tramp business segment, is the one struggling from doing this, right? Because they don't know where they are going, they don't know how much they need, and so on.
Yeah, it's more stochastic type of trade. So of
Exactly.
course, if you're doing long-term contracts, then it's one thing. If Vincent was calling that a bit, if you are trading from A to B on a 5-year contract, of course you pretty much know your exposure. But of course, if it's more stochastic, where you're just trading voyage by voyage and you don't know, then you cannot necessarily forecast your consumption. But what we saw with EU ETS was that there were there were some bigger companies actually offering their customers, like the ship owners, to hedge on be smarter at like acquiring EUAs. So I'm thinking about the same, say, availability and sourcing more on the future side is of course an aspect you could look into.
Yeah, I think the difference here is, in order not to confuse with the EU ETS or put EU ETS and FuelEU into the same pocket, because one thing is papers and another thing is physical. So FuelEU is the physical, and FuelEU is the paper, right? So the only thing you can hedge yourself out on the FuelEU is to secure your source and the product via a contract. But of course, the contract can be placed on hedging. But yeah.
Yeah, I see. I've heard that from some of the bigger charters or owners that this is a way to go about it. But of course, another part is, of course, now we're discussing, say, coming a little bit on the EU ETS. But of course, the sourcing of low carbon fuels or biofuels is, of course, a way to comply with various regulatory schemes, not only FuelEU. So it also impacts your CI. It impacts a lot of other, you could say, compliance aspects. Not in the same way, and it's difficult, but there is kind of overlap in this.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, both with the MRV and the CII and EU ETS and FuelEU, definitely there is overlaps.
Do we have any comment on that? Like is there, say, what is the benefit of, say, buying biofuel over other fuel types? Because there is say that there could be, say, multiple effects of the same, because there are overlaps in the regulatory schemes while they impact differently. So they have run with a different, say, emission factors and all these kind of things.
Yeah, so taking biodiesel, I guess any biofuel that satisfies FuelEU will be 0 rated under the ETS. So you also, how we talk about it is you pay more for your FuelEU compliance, but you also get a bit of a discount on your ETS compliance when you do so. And so that's also true for any future fuels. Renewable fuels of non-biological origin, or FNBOs, would also be the case, as well as any shore power usage, electricity, or use of batteries on board, which for some ferries, for example, may be relevant.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we are running short on time. We're getting to the end of this. Should we take a short round about to close it off? Any last remarks from you, Vincent? Do you have anything, any good takeaways for the audience listening in here you would like to share?
What could I say? That's this regulation, and I think it's an important point that Julie mentioned. Europe is developing this regulation, but I'm almost sure that the other country will follow. So let's be ready for what Europe is preparing, because it will help us to be very ready to what the other country will give us. In addition, I think that IMO could also put in place some regulation. They are saying they are working on a sort of system similar to ETS, so for which you have to pay for your emission. So I think that we need to be prepared to a lot of more CO2 regulation all over the world. So I think that be ready to FuelEU is a good way to start to thinking it and understand how we will travel this decarbonization journey for the next 20, 50 years.
Joe, do we have any last remarks on, you say, what do you see the future ahead of us here in the development on the regulatory landscape here?
Yeah, I think so. I also just threw some resources in the chat. For companies struggling with this, there's a lot to learn about, and we at the center and many others are trying to help companies. As Vincent said, that by learning more about FuelEU and EU ETS, this will prepare you for an increasing number of regulations. I think we know there might be setbacks in terms of climate policies in the near term, but in the long term, these policies will only go one direction, which is to increase over time. So putting your head in the sand will not pay off in the long term. And on the contrary, I guess the final note is that we always try to encourage people to look at the opportunities in the regulation. For a long time, the only option if you wanted to go green was to try and desperately find a cargo owner that was willing to pay. And we all know that there are not a lot of those out there. So there are opportunities here in the regulation. If you're feeling the pressure, if you have commitments to go green, to take advantage of the regulation, to be able to fund those new initiatives and to buy that new fancy ship with the new fancy fuel that we hope will appear. So yeah, best of luck and hope those resources help. Thanks.
Thanks, Joe. Julie, any last comments, closure?
I think Vincent and Joe very much summarized what I was going to say. I just want to say to the audience out there, be prepared. Put yourself in the strongest strategic way you can do now, because it's only going to be harder.
Thank you very much, Julie. Alexander, do you have any last remarks from your recommendations?
Yeah, I would totally agree with all the panelists, what they just said. All these regulations is here to stay. So, don't try to avoid it, embrace it. You have no other option. And here is what I would like to highlight is that this regulation and all the regulation to come will require a lot more transparency, a lot of more clear communication, a lot of more collaboration going forward. Nobody can do it on their own. So, because you have a huge value chain that every single piece needs to fit. So, enhanced collaboration would be my key message going forward.
All right. Thank you very much. I have one last comment to summarize. From my perspective, I think making sure that, of course, that you, for your future biofuels or alternative fuels, you could say collect the right information, ensure that you have the evidence. Otherwise, you will fail. Understand where you stand on a greenhouse gas intensity for your fleet. Are you in a surplus or deficit position? That allows you to provide, you could say, that grants you more options to navigate. And the earlier you get that kind of overview, the more you can say comply cost effectively and efficiently. So that would be, say, my advice. Also listening to all the comments and recommendations from the panelists here. So thank you everyone for attending today. And sorry that we didn't cover all the Q&A. I think we will maybe try to provide some answers offline as well to the ones that didn't get answers. I think Julie was very good at overlooking some of these. So thanks to Julie for answering a lot on the Q&A session or the Q&A coming in. So thank you very much for attending, and then thanks for BS Group for arranging this. Thanks for now, and thanks to all the panelists for sitting in.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jacob.
Welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.